Before we dive in, let me know in the comments, what country are you watching from? I'd love to see where our viewers are tuning in from. And if you enjoy the video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more. Working the North Slope oil fields in Alaska isn't for everyone. The isolation wears on you after a while. Nothing but endless white tundra and frozen dark skies for months straight. I'd been doing pipeline repair near Prudhoe Bay for about 6 years when this happened. February 2018. The money was good, real good, which is why guys like me, Brad, and Tommy kept coming back each season. We were a tight crew, always watched out for each other during blizzards and dangerous equipment failures that could kill you before you even got a chance to radio for help. That rotation, we had just finished a week-long repair on a pipeline section that had stress cracks from the freeze-thaw cycles. The company had us staying in one of those prefab shelters about 40 miles south of Deadhorse, right off the Dalton Highway. You know, that icy road the truckers use. The drive back should have been normal. We'd done it countless times before in Brad's modified Ford F-350, the one with tire chains on all four wheels, and heating strong enough to stop you from freezing solid. Tommy was stretched out asleep in the back seat while I rode shotgun, keeping Brad company as he steered us through what was turning into a pretty bad snowstorm. Visibility was maybe 30 feet at best. The headlights just reflected off the spinning snow, forming this strange white tunnel, like we were flying through space. About 2 hours into the drive, Brad suddenly slammed the brakes hard enough that Tommy flew forward into my seat. Through the storm, barely visible, was a figure stumbling along the side of the road. No car, no hazard lights, nothing. Just this lone person in a heavy parka, walking in that desperate way people move when hypothermia is taking over. Brad pulled over immediately. You don't leave anyone out in that kind of cold, not when it's 40 below and dropping. Tommy woke up swearing about the stop, but shut up as soon as he saw. The three of us sat watching this man fight his way through knee-deep snow about 20 yards up the road. His parka looked like old military surplus, olive green with a fur-trimmed hood blowing wildly in the wind. Right away, something seemed off about the way he moved. It wasn't the stumbling you'd expect from someone freezing. It was mechanical, almost like he was walking on a set path only he could see. Brad honked the horn twice. The man didn't react. He didn't turn his head, didn't change pace, just kept stepping forward, arms hanging at his sides. Jesus Christ, he's going to die out there, Tommy muttered, reaching for the door. Brad stopped the truck, and we all jumped out, the wind cutting into us like sharp blades. Even with our heavy gear, the cold pressed into every gap and zipper. We jogged toward the man, shouting, though the storm swallowed most of our voices. When we were within 10 feet, Brad grabbed his shoulder to turn him around. That's when everything shifted. His face was pale, too pale, almost white paper, but it didn't look frostbitten. His eyes were a cloudy gray, like dirty ice, and they didn't seem to see us at all. He had maybe 3 days' worth of stubble, dark against that unnatural skin. His lips were moving, muttering words we couldn't hear in the wind. But it was the scar that made Brad step back, a jagged line running from temple to jaw, the kind of scar that says someone lived through something they shouldn't have. "Sir, are you okay?" Tommy yelled, waving in front of his eyes. No reaction. The man just swayed slightly, those gray eyes staring through us at something unseen. His lips kept moving nonstop. Against every instinct telling me not to, I leaned closer and finally caught what he was saying, over and over. 247, 247, 247. Brad and Tommy looked at each other. Everyone working up here had heard stories about people losing their minds from the isolation, but this wasn't that. This felt wrong in a way I couldn't explain. Still, we had to get him in the truck. Leaving him out here wasn't an option. If he died, we'd be the ones explaining a frozen corpse to troopers, and none of us wanted that. It took all three of us to lead him to the Ford. He didn't resist, but he didn't help either. Just let us drag him stiffly like a mannequin. His skin was freezing cold through the parka, but he wasn't shivering. Out here, you learn quick. When shivering stops, you're in danger. But he was far past that, and yet still standing. We pushed him into the back with Tommy, who immediately pressed himself against the far door. Brad cranked the heater and pulled back onto the Dalton. For 10 minutes, nobody spoke. The only noise was the blasting fan and the man's lips still muttering those numbers. Then Tommy broke the silence. Guys, doesn't he look like that missing snowmobiler? The one they found the sled but never found him? Brad gripped the wheel tighter. I remember the story too. Everyone did. February 2016. A local guy named Christopher Vaughn vanished during a solo snowmobile run. They found his sled wrecked against a tree about 15 miles from where we'd found this man. Blood on the seat, drag marks into the woods that just stopped. Search crews scoured the area for 2 weeks before giving up. In those conditions, without shelter, you'd last hours at best. They declared him dead, held a memorial. His brother worked for a drilling company, used to drink at the bar in Dead Horse. Said Christopher had that exact scar from an accident with a boat propeller as a kid. The longer I looked in the mirror at the passenger in our back seat, the sicker my stomach felt. Same scar, same face. Only difference, Christopher's eyes had been brown in the photos, not this cloudy gray. The shelter appeared ahead, glowing faintly through the snow. A metal unit, lights like a beacon in the storm. We radioed ahead, but all we got was static. Nothing unusual in weather like this. The building was just one of those portable units the companies used along the pipeline. Reinforced containers with bunks, a tiny kitchen, and a radio room. Brad parked right up to the door, and we got ready to bring him inside. That's when the man spoke for the first time. His voice was wrong, low, and garbled, like someone speaking underwater. Can't go in, not yet, not until 2:47. Tommy jumped so hard he hit his head, but no way were we leaving him out to freeze, no matter what he wanted. Brad had to grab him in a bear hug while Tommy and I each took an arm. We managed to drag him inside. The moment we crossed the threshold, he went completely limp, dead weight almost dropping us all. We laid him on a lower bunk while Brad checked the radio and Tommy started water for coffee. I stayed with the man, checking his pulse, slow but steady, and trying to understand what we were dealing with. Under the fluorescent light, more details stood out. His fingernails were far too long, yellowed, curling like they hadn't been cut for months. He had no smell, no sweat, no body odor, nothing. Just a sterile absence. His parka pockets were empty except for one thing that made my chest tighten. A snowmobile key on a cracked leather fob from the Dead Horse gas station. Stamped into it, C. Vaughn, 2015. Tommy saw it, froze, and whispered, "That's not possible." But it was. Brad came back, shaking his head. Radio was useless until the storm cleared, probably 8 to 10 more hours. Then the lights flickered, just once, but enough to make us look up. Backup generators almost never failed. When the lights steadied, our passenger was awake, staring at the wall clock. It read 11:30 p.m. His lips were moving faster now. 2:47. Tommy clutched my arm, eyes wide. "We need to get out of here. Now." But Brad pointed to the window where the storm was so thick we couldn't even see the truck. We were trapped. And in my gut, I knew that was exactly how it was supposed to be. The next hours dragged endlessly. We rotated watching him. Brad made sandwiches no one touched. Tommy cleaned his tools again and again. I kept checking outside, desperate for a break in the storm. The man never moved from the bunk, only stared at the clock, lips mumbling that countdown. Around 2 a.m., exhaustion finally hit. Tommy took first watch while Brad and I lay on the other bunks. I didn't think I'd sleep, but the crash hit hard. I woke to Tommy shaking me violently, panicked. The clock read 2:46. Brad stood at the door gripping a wrench. "He's gone," Tommy gasped. I looked away for a second, and he vanished. We tore through the shelter, but there was nowhere for him to go. Then came the sound. 3 slow knocks on the steel door. Measured, deliberate. The clock struck 2:47. The knocking repeated at the north window. Then the south. Then the door again. Something was circling the shelter, testing the entrances. Brad's grip on the wrench whitened his knuckles. That's impossible. Nobody could survive out there. But we all knew this wasn't normal. At 2:48, the knock stopped, leaving behind a silence so deep it felt like pressure in our heads. None of us dared move until dawn. When the storm broke around 7 a.m., we rushed outside. That's when we saw no footprints anywhere, no tracks near the doors, none under the windows. The snow was perfect, untouched. But then Tommy didn't make it to the truck. 1 second he was behind us, the next he was gone. No sound, no struggle, no sign at all. Just empty air where he'd been. Brad and I panicked, jumped into the Ford and drove nonstop to Fairbanks. We filed a missing persons report, told them about the stranger, left out the part about him being Christopher Vaughn. 3 days later, they found Tommy's body 15 miles from that shelter, the exact spot where Vaughn's snowmobile had crashed. Frozen solid, lips blue, drag marks in the snow that stopped in the same way as before. The nights at mile 237 fuel stops stretched endlessly, each one bleeding into the next until time lost all meaning. I'd been there since early November, manning the counter while Arctic winds rattled the windows and 18-wheelers rolled past like ghosts on the Dalton Highway. The job paid well enough for a college student trying to save money, and the owner, an old guy named Eugene, didn't ask too many questions when I needed extra shifts. Most nights passed without incident. Truckers grabbing coffee, locals filling up, maybe the odd tourist lost in the storm. The station wasn't much. 2 pumps outside, a small store with overpriced snacks, and a bathroom that barely worked when the pipes weren't frozen. Everything changed on my 3rd Wednesday. The clock had just hit 2 a.m. when I saw headlights cutting through the blizzard. An old blue Chevy pickup, rust chewing through its paint, rolled up to pump number 4 and stopped. The driver didn't move, didn't get out, didn't turn off the engine, didn't do anything. Just sat there, only a shadow behind a frost-covered windshield. After 10 minutes, I figured maybe he'd broken down or fallen asleep. I pulled on my jacket to check, but before I got outside, the truck reversed and vanished into the storm. Strange, sure, but strange was normal out here. I wrote it in the logbook and went back to stocking shelves. I thought that was the end. The next Wednesday came with another storm, worse than the last. Visibility maybe 20 feet, wind making the whole station creak like an old ship. Eugene had warned me about nights like that, said sometimes even truckers waited them out. I was in the back counting inventory when I heard the rumble again. The clock read exactly 2 a.m. On the security monitor, I watched that same blue Chevy pull into pump 4. Same spot, same still driver. This time I got a better angle. The man wore a heavy coat with the hood up, hands gripping the wheel at 10 and 2. He didn't shift, didn't reach for the radio, didn't even seem to breathe. I let it go on for 15 minutes before deciding to walk out. But the second I grabbed my keys, the reverse lights came on. By the time I reached the pump, the truck was gone, its tracks already filling with snow. It unsettled me in a way I couldn't explain. His movements, or lack of them, were too exact, like a loop playing again and again. I spent the rest of the shift tense, jumping at every set of headlights, but the Chevy didn't return. The next morning I told Eugene casually. He just shrugged, said, "We get all kinds during storm season." But he wouldn't meet my eyes, and his fingers tapped nervously on the counter. By the third Wednesday, I was ready. I switched shifts to make sure I was there at 2 a.m. The station's cameras were old, from the early 2000s, recording on a loop. I'd figured out how to save clips to a USB, and I had one in my pocket. The storm that night was lighter, steady snow instead of a blizzard, which meant I could see better. I waited behind the counter with a clear view of Pump 4, pretending to read. At 1:58, I heard it, the engine growing closer. The blue Chevy appeared out of the night, pulling into the same exact spot like it had been programmed. I zoomed the camera in. What I saw made my skin crawl. The man wasn't just still. He was impossibly still. No breath, no movement at all. His face hidden by the hood, but his hands looked wrong. Grayish skin, stiff fingers like they'd frozen in place. I recorded everything, my heart pounding. 10 minutes later, the reverse lights came on. But instead of backing straight, the truck angled, turning the driver's side toward the camera. The hood slipped back just enough for me to see his face. I stumbled backward, crashing into the shelves. His features were human, but lifeless. Sunken eyes that didn't reflect light. Skin like dried leather. A face empty of any sign of being alive. No expression, no awareness, nothing. The truck slid into the night before I could recover. I replayed the footage again and again, hoping I'd imagined it. But every view confirmed it. Whatever sat in that truck wasn't right. I saved multiple copies and started digging through the station's old binders. Eugene kept everything. Delivery records, maintenance logs, incidents, dating back decades. That's when I found the first mention. December 1993, a note about an abandoned vehicle at Pump 4 during the 2 a.m. hour. Same description, blue Chevy pickup, male driver, never leaves the truck. The entries appeared every so often after that, always on Wednesdays, always in winter storms, always at 2 a.m. The real shock was in a folder labeled Incident Reports, Law Enforcement. Inside were photocopied police reports, missing persons flyers, and newspaper clippings. One report caught my eye right away. It was a newspaper piece from January 1992 about a man named Walter Hicks who disappeared in a terrible blizzard. He had been driving home from his mining job when both he and his blue 1988 Chevy Silverado vanished somewhere along the Dalton Highway. Search crews looked for days but found nothing, not even a trace of the truck. The article had a photo of Walter, and even though the quality was poor, I recognized the same sunken face. But what really shocked me was the last paper in the folder. Someone had checked the truck's license plate just 2 years ago and attached the results. The plate was still registered to Walter's truck, the same vehicle declared missing back in January 1992, more than 30 years earlier. I tried calling Eugene right away, but his phone went straight to voicemail. The next Wednesday was only 2 days away, and I couldn't decide whether to quit on the spot or stay to finally face whatever kept coming back to Pump 4. In the end, curiosity won. It felt like I had some duty to find out the truth, maybe even for Walter himself, wherever he really was. I spent the next 2 days digging through anything I could find about his disappearance. Walter had been 28 when it happened, working rotating shifts at the Red Dog mine, and he'd left behind a wife and baby daughter. The storm that night had been brutal. Visibility at 0, temperatures dropping to 40 below. One part of the police report stood out. Walter's last radio call to the mine said he was stopping for gas, though he didn't mention where. Based on the timeline, he would have been near mile 237 right around 2 a.m., the exact time the blizzard was at its worst. I also found something else while reading the old papers. 3 other people had gone missing along that same stretch of road in the years since. Every single case happened during winter storms, always at night. None of those people were ever found. When Wednesday came, the skies were clear for once. The stars were shining bright through the windows, and the temperature sat at minus 20. I convinced myself maybe the pattern would finally break, that maybe Walter's truck only showed up when storms hit. But at 1:45 a.m., clouds rolled in suddenly, dumping heavy snow until visibility vanished again. By 1:55, I knew he would appear. I had prepared everything. Fresh batteries for my flashlight, phone charge, Eugene's number ready, and a baseball bat from the storage closet within reach. At exactly 2 o'clock, the familiar headlights broke through the snow. The same blue Chevy pulled up to pump 4 with machine-like accuracy, and Walter, or whatever was left of him, sat behind the wheel as always. This time I didn't hesitate. I grabbed the flashlight and the bat, forced a deep breath, and stepped into the storm. The cold slammed into me like a wall, stinging my skin and taking my breath away. Snow swirled madly, leaving only a white void cut by the faint glow of the station lights and the shape of that idling truck. As I got closer to pump 4, I noticed something the cameras had never shown. The snow around the truck fell differently. It curved away, leaving a perfect circle where not a single flake landed on the vehicle. Stranger still, the windows had no fog, no sign of breath, no condensation at all. Inside looked just as frozen as the outside. When I reached the driver's side, my flashlight caught his profile. Up close, Walter's face was worse than I imagined. Skin stretched thin and dry over sharp bones. Eyes open but seeing nothing. Lips frozen slightly apart as if mid-sentence. I raised my hand to knock on the glass. That's when everything went wrong. The second my knuckles touched the window, the entire station lost power. Lights and pumps went dark. The glow behind me disappeared completely, and even my flashlight sputtered and died. In that pitch black, I heard the driver's door creak open for the first time. The backup generator should have restored light within seconds, but the darkness just went on. I stumbled backward, swinging the bat wildly while fumbling with my useless flashlight. Then impossibly, a glow appeared, but it came from inside the station. Not the usual harsh white lights, but a soft, pale illumination seeping through the windows. Through the heavy snow, I saw a figure inside, perfectly still, facing outward. Its shape was wrong. Too tall, too thin, but I recognized the winter coat and hollow face. Walter was standing inside the locked station, staring out through the glass. Frost spread from where he stood, crawling outward in branching veins. My blood ran cold when I realized the truck behind me was still running, engine steady. I turned my head and confirmed what I already knew. The driver's seat was empty, door open like a gaping mouth. When I looked back, Walter was closer now, pressed almost to the window, his ruined face fully visible. His lifeless eyes locked onto mine, and I couldn't breathe. Then the sound came. A voice muffled by the glass like frozen wind rattling through pipes, but the words were clear. Still looking for pump 4. Each word dragged out, and with every syllable, more frost spread across the glass until the whole storefront turned white. I stumbled backward, nearly falling, the bat useless in my shaking hand. The truck's engine suddenly roared, headlights flashing in a rhythm that almost looked like Morse code. The glow from inside the station pulsed in time with the lights. My terror deepened when I realized Walter wasn't alone. Shapes moved behind him. Other figures in winter gear, all stepping up to the glass beside him. 4 in total, the same number as the missing people I had read about. They all stared with the same lifeless eyes, their mouths moving together in silent words I couldn't hear over the storm. The frost on the glass twisted into letters, spelling out a message. Help us find the way. I bolted, not toward the truck, not to the highway, but around to the employee entrance. My hands shook as I fumbled for the keys, those dead eyes following me through each window. Finally, the door gave, and I rushed inside, slamming it shut and locking it. At that exact moment, the emergency lights flicked on, and everything looked normal again. The windows were clear, no frost, no shadows, nothing. Just the station as usual, except for the pounding of my heart. But outside, the sound of the idling truck at Pump 4 was still there, steady and real. I called 911, rambling about intruders, blackouts, anything that would get help. I shoved the USB drive with the saved footage into my pocket, needing proof of what I'd seen. That's when I noticed the clock on the wall. It read 2:47 a.m., but my phone said only 10 minutes had passed since the blackout. When police finally arrived, they found nothing. No truck, no tracks in the snow besides mine, no frost damage to the windows. The next morning, I handed Eugene my resignation, packed everything, and left Alaska for good. But on winter nights when snow falls heavy, I still dream about Pump 4 and those words written in ice. I never learned what they were searching for, and honestly, I pray I never do. October 2019 was when everything changed between me and my dad. We had planned a moose hunt up in Alaska's Copper River Basin for months. Our first real father-son trip since I'd moved to Seattle for work 3 years earlier. I was 28 then, doing consulting, and I hadn't spent more than a weekend with him since college. He had hunted that area for more than 20 years. He knew every ridge and creek out there like they were part of his own backyard. We drove up from Anchorage in his old Chevy Silverado, rifles strapped down and camping gear packed tight. Both of us were honestly excited to cut ourselves off from the world for 5 whole days. The plan sounded simple enough: track a few moose, maybe get lucky with a clean shot, and just soak in the wild without phones buzzing or work distractions pulling us away. That first day went exactly how we'd hoped. We hiked about 6 miles from where we parked, set up a solid camp near a narrow creek that wound through a valley thick with spruce and birch trees. Dad had that confident swagger he always carried in the woods, pointing out animal tracks, explaining how the wind moved through the trees, telling old hunting stories from past trips out there. The weather felt crisp, but not brutal, around 35 degrees with clear skies and that golden autumn light shining through the branches. We pitched our tent, sorted our gear, and spent the evening talking about where we'd head in the morning, sipping coffee mixed with a splash of whiskey. Everything felt calm, normal. We were both tired from the hike, sitting quietly, talking about family and work stress. Neither of us had the faintest clue that something was already watching us. The strangeness started on day 2. We'd been walking for 3 hours, following a narrow game trail that twisted up through rocky outcrops, when Dad suddenly froze mid-step. His whole face shifted from relaxed to deeply uneasy. When I caught up, I saw it too. Scattered pieces of what once had been a caribou lay ahead, but not like anything I'd ever come across. The bones were picked clean, stripped in a way that looked almost surgical. The disturbing part was how they were arranged. They weren't scattered at random like a wolf or bear kill. Instead, they formed a rough circle around a flat boulder, the skull placed perfectly in the middle, hollow eyes staring up at the gray sky, the bigger bones stretching outward like spokes on a wheel. Dad knelt by the remains, running his hand across the smooth bone edges. He'd been hunting more than 20 years, seen bear kills, wolves ripping through prey, even mountain lion strikes. But this was nothing like those. The bones were too perfect, too neat. And the ground around us held not one sign of tracks. No paw prints, no drag marks, not even a scuff. Kevin, he said quietly, using my full name, which he only did when he was truly worried. I've never seen anything like this. Whatever did this was strong enough to drop a caribou, but smart enough to leave nothing behind. We spent 10 more minutes circling wider, looking for any trace of fur, blood, or a trail. Nothing. No bent branches, no dirt disturbed. It was like the creature appeared from nowhere, laid the bones down with care, then vanished without a trace. We tried shaking it off, continuing our hike, but both of us were rattled. Dad kept glancing back at the bone circle, while I found myself checking the tree line more often. About 2 miles further, we came across another kill. This time, it was just a ptarmigan. But again, the remains were arranged in that same deliberate pattern. The small bones sat in a perfect circle around a smooth stone, the tiny skull resting exactly at the center. Even more unsettling, ptarmigans are ground birds, easy prey for foxes or hawks, yet no feathers, no signs of struggle, nothing. Dad picked up one of the fragile wing bones, holding it to the light, showing how neatly it had been stripped. "This is surgical work," he muttered under his breath. "No animal in the wild does this with such precision." The pattern repeated as the day went on. We stumbled across 5 more kill sites, each one stranger and cleaner than the last. A ground squirrel laid out around a piece of quartz. A marten's remains lined up perfectly around a flat piece of shale. Every spot was spotless, almost sterile, with that same careful placement that made the hair on my neck stand straight. What shook me most was how the kills seemed to be happening closer in time. The caribou had been dead for days, maybe weeks, but the last one still carried that sharp, metallic scent of fresh death. Dad's body language changed. He carried his rifle differently, ready at all times, constantly scanning behind us. Neither of us said it aloud, but we both knew something was tracking us. Not just following, leading us. Whatever it was stayed just far enough ahead, preparing these gruesome markers like it wanted us to see. Like we were being drawn in deeper, pushed along a trail of blood, meant as both a warning and a lure. That night we set up camp in a tight clearing ringed with spruce. Neither of us wanted to push on. Dad insisted we keep the fire going all night, switching off on watch duty, something we'd never done before. I took the first shift, sitting against a log, rifle across my lap, ears straining with every snap of a branch or rustle outside the circle of light. Around 2 a.m., during Dad's shift, I woke to his urgent whisper, my name, sharp and tight. I blinked awake to see his pale face lit by the fire as he pointed toward the tree line. "There," he breathed, "between those 2 big spruces. Don't move too fast. Just tell me what you see." I turned slowly, and then I saw them. 2 huge yellow eyes staring back, reflecting the firelight from at least 8 feet up. They didn't glow green like a deer or moose would. They burned gold, steady and pulsing with something that felt aware. Those eyes stayed fixed on us, unblinking, for what seemed like forever but was probably 15 minutes. They never shifted, never blinked, never breathed. Just watched. Dad had his rifle raised, but neither of us could make out a body behind the glow. Whatever it was massive. Eye placement that high up meant larger than any wolf or bear I'd ever heard of. The strangest part was the silence. No breath, no sound of movement, no crack of branches. Just those unblinking eyes, steady and patient, waiting. When the faint light of dawn finally crept through the trees, the eyes simply disappeared. 1 second there, the next, gone, as if they had never existed at all. When we searched the spot with full daylight, we found nothing. No tracks, no broken brush, no trace. Day 3 changed everything. We had hiked 4 hours, both of us tired and wired after that sleepless night, when we reached the ridge looking down into the main valley. Dad froze, binoculars raised, then whispered, voice shaking, "Jesus Christ, tell me I'm not losing my mind." He handed me the binoculars and I focused where he pointed. And there it was, standing on the opposite ridge, maybe 800 yards away, was the biggest wolf I'd ever seen. But calling it a wolf didn't feel right. It was enormous, the size of a small horse, with shoulders so broad it looked unnatural. Its fur was black, except for strange silver streaks down its spine that caught the sunlight like polished steel. My chest tightened just from the way it stood, completely still, facing us directly, as if it had been waiting for this moment. The wolf held its ground for 2 full minutes, watching us. Even from that distance, I felt its gaze pressing down, sharp and deliberate, as though it was memorizing us. Dad tried lining up a shot, hands fumbling, but the range was too far. Then, without warning, the thing turned and began moving along the ridge. Its gait was wrong, too fluid, flowing like shadow instead of flesh and bone. It covered ground impossibly fast, gliding over rock that would trip any normal animal. What chilled me most was how it kept stopping every 100 yards, turning its head back toward us, holding the stare just long enough for us to find it again before moving on. It was showing us how easily it could outpace and outthink us, how every step of this was under its control. That's when everything clicked into place for me. The bone patterns, the fresh kills getting newer as we move further into the basin, the silent watching at night, and now this open show of control. We weren't hunting in its territory anymore. We were the ones being hunted. This wasn't just some random animal protecting its land. This was something far smarter and more purposeful. The wolf had been following us since the start, staying close enough to see us while leaving behind those disturbing kill displays as warnings. Dad must have realized it too, because he grabbed my arm and said, "We're leaving right now. This thing has been toying with us." We packed our gear as quickly as we could, dropping any idea of finishing the hunt. On the way back down the valley, I turned for one last look through the binoculars. The wolf was still there, sitting like a stone guardian, watching us leave with what almost looked like satisfaction. The walk back to the truck took us 6 long hours of steady hiking. Both of us kept scanning the ridges and tree lines the whole time. Neither of us said much, but I knew Dad was wrestling with the same thought that was eating at me. That giant wolf hadn't just stumbled across us. It had controlled the whole trip from the very start. Every kill site, every strange circle of bones, every creeping sense of fear had been set up to pull us further in until the moment it chose to show itself. When we finally reached the Silverado, Dad threw the gear into the back with shaking hands and started the engine before I'd even shut my door. As we pulled away, I kept staring into the mirror at the fading wilderness, and I swear I could still feel those glowing eyes following us. We never went back to that place, and Dad sold all his hunting gear the next spring. Neither of us ever spoke about what happened, but we both knew we had faced something that wasn't supposed to exist. A predator at the very top, but with a mind that felt almost beyond natural. We were just lucky enough to escape alive. The Caribou Migration Project looked like the perfect chance to push my career forward as a wildlife biologist. After 6 years of smaller projects, I finally had the opportunity to lead a team studying how climate change was affecting migration routes near the Yukon River. The assignment came in during late April 2017, and within 2 weeks I was on my way into the Canadian wilderness with a team of 5. We had to track 43 GPS-collared caribou over 3 weeks, keeping detailed records of their movements and behaviors. The data we gathered could help shape major conservation policies, which made this one of the most important projects I'd ever taken part in. I remember feeling both thrilled and pressured as we packed up all our equipment. We had thermal drones, radio trackers, and enough supplies for a long stay in one of the most remote parts of the country. Our camp was set up at an old logging site that had been abandoned since the 1980s. It was the perfect location for our work. Flat ground for the gear, easy water access from the river, and directly along a main caribou path. But the place gave off a strange feeling. Old machines rusted in the dirt, half buried under moss and dead leaves, while rotting buildings sagged as the forest swallowed them. My team included Dr. James Mitchell, who was our lead researcher, Lisa Chen, from the university, and 2 graduate students named Alex and Maria. We had all worked together before, so we knew how to set up the camp, assign daily jobs, and get into a steady research routine. At first, everything went smoothly. The GPS collars were giving us clear, steady signals each day. Mornings began with coffee around the camp stove while we checked the digital maps, watching dozens of red dots move steadily across the screen. The caribou were right on track, resting in feeding areas during the day and traveling north at night. Lisa was in charge of the drones, getting thermal footage to match the GPS data. Alex and Maria managed the radio signals, while Dr. Mitchell and I worked on pattern analysis and field notes. The weather stayed perfect, cool in the mornings, warm by afternoon, with crisp, clear nights that kept our systems running smoothly. By the 5th day, we had already started noticing changes in the migration patterns, exactly the kind of information that would make our findings important. Our days became predictable, even comfortable. But while everything looked fine with the work, I kept noticing little details about the logging site that didn't sit right. Some trees had perfectly straight cuts, far too sharp for normal logging gear from the 1980s. The concrete foundations of the old buildings formed strange patterns, as if the site had been laid out with some hidden design. We also dug up a few metal plates, each with stamped numbers, but no company names or dates. Dr. Mitchell pointed out that most logging sites left behind easy-to-trace evidence, marked trees, equipment IDs, clear signage. But this place was different, too clean, too stripped of identity. It didn't get in the way of our work, so we left it alone. But everything changed on the night of May 15th. I was in my tent going through the data logs around 11:30 p.m. when Alex rushed in, his face pale in the lantern glow. "Heather, you need to see this right now," he said, voice tight with worry. All 43 GPS signals had vanished at exactly 11:17 p.m. Not one by one, not slowly, but all at once, like a switch had been flipped. Our system showed no errors, no warnings, nothing to explain the sudden blackout. Lisa ran a full check on the receivers while Dr. Mitchell tested the backups, but everything on our side worked perfectly. For the next 3 hours, we tried everything to bring the signals back, switching frequencies, boosting power, even sending manual pings to each collar. Nothing. It was as if every caribou had just vanished at the same moment, leaving us staring at empty maps with no idea why. The silence afterward felt wrong. Normally, the Canadian forest at night is alive with noises, owls calling, branches creaking, small animals in the brush. But after the signals disappeared, even those sounds seemed to stop. The quiet pressed in so thick it made my ears ring. We set up shifts to watch the equipment through the night, hoping the signals might suddenly return. Dr. Mitchell stayed first, then Lisa, then Alex. By the time it was my turn at 4 a.m., I was sitting alone in the monitoring tent, surrounded by silent machines, trying to understand what had happened. The GPS system had never gone down like this before, and for every collar to vanish at the exact same second was too precise to be an accident. I kept digging through the data logs, hoping for some clue we'd missed. Dawn didn't bring answers, only more dread. We broke camp fast and moved toward the last known area of the closest herd, about 6 miles northeast. The hike through the dense forest was heavy with tension, none of us saying much, each person locked in their own thoughts. But when we reached the area, the caribou were gone without a trace. No tracks, no droppings, no sign that the animals had ever been there. But our gear was untouched, sitting exactly where we had left it the day before. Cameras, motion sensors, and even the backup GPS units were all still working normally, recording data without issue. It was like the caribou had vanished into thin air, leaving behind only the tools we had used to watch them. Lisa suggested we spread our search area, but Dr. Mitchell already looked worried about our schedule and supplies. We spent the entire day exploring a 12-mile radius, finding nothing but empty forest and the heavy feeling that something very unusual had taken place. That evening, Lisa decided to check the thermal drone footage from the night before, hoping to spot some clue about where the animals had gone. We crowded around her laptop in the main tent, staring at hours of grainy black and white thermal video. Most of it showed exactly what we expected. Still forest, the occasional small animal moving, the usual heat patterns of a calm wilderness night. But at 11:15 p.m., only 2 minutes before all the GPS signals cut out, the footage captured something none of us had ever seen. 7 tall shapes came out of the tree line, walking in perfect rhythm across the open clearing near camp. They looked human, but wrong in ways we couldn't explain. Too tall, too smooth in their movements, their steps flowing with a strange grace that felt more like a machine than a living thing. The heat signatures showed they were warmer than the forest, but cooler than normal human bodies. The most disturbing part was how they moved as one, like parts of the same being, each keeping the same distance and mirroring the same gestures as they passed across the screen and slipped back into the dark trees on the far side. Nobody spoke for minutes after the clip ended. Dr. Mitchell rewound it 3 times, staring hard at every frame, while Alex muttered over and over that the equipment had to be broken. But Lisa and I both knew it wasn't. The thermal images were too sharp, too steady to be a mistake. Each figure stood close to 8 feet tall, with long, stretched limbs and movements that made it clear they knew the ground well. They crossed fallen logs and thick brush without a sound, without shaking a single branch, and the drone's audio picked up nothing at all. What unsettled me most was the perfect coordination. It wasn't just that they walked in line, it was the way they copied every tiny motion. When the first one lifted its arm, the other 6 repeated the same action at the same moment, as if they shared one mind. We replayed the clip again and again, but it only left us more unsure of what we were facing and whether it tied to the vanishing herds. That night we created new rules. No one was allowed to leave a tent without a partner, and we set hourly check-ins until sunrise. Still, I barely closed my eyes, listening for anything outside and wondering if those things were out there watching. Around 3 a.m., I heard Maria whispering nervously to Alex in the tent next to mine. When I asked if something was wrong, she said it was just a bad dream. The night passed without anything happening, but the morning brought something much worse that made yesterday's mystery seem small. At breakfast around 7 a.m., we realized Alex was missing. His sleeping bag was empty, his things neatly placed by his cot, but his boots were gone. We searched the camp and called out his name, checking everywhere he might have gone. Dr. Mitchell was already talking about calling for emergency help when I thought to check the river. I guess maybe Alex went for water and slipped. But what I found on the riverbank made no sense at all. His boots were placed carefully on a flat rock, lined up perfectly side by side facing the water. The laces were tied neatly, just like he always wore them, and the leather was spotless, not even damp or marked by mud. Yet there were no footprints, not leading to the boots or away from them. Nothing on the wet river soil to explain how they got there. The rock itself was bone dry, even though morning mist had dampened everything else nearby. I called the others over and we spent 2 hours scouring every inch of ground, but the lack of tracks was total. Even if someone had tried to cover them, we would have seen signs of that. Instead, the boots looked placed with care, like a display left by something that could move without touching the ground at all. We packed the camp immediately and hiked to the nearest spot with communication access to call for help. The search and rescue lasted 4 days, with helicopters, trained dogs, and skilled teams combing the woods. But not a single trace of Alex was found. The final report declared him missing, likely drowned in the river, the idea being that he slipped in and got swept away. But that didn't explain the boots, which investigators brushed off as unimportant details. 6 months later, I got a phone call from a forestry worker doing surveys near the same abandoned site. He had uncovered something under a pile of stones. It was one of the GPS collars still working, and the data showed it hadn't moved since May 15 at 11:17 p.m. It was one of the collars from the missing caribou, and the time matched exactly with when all the signals had vanished. I never returned to that place again, and I never worked on another project in that area. Some things are better left unanswered. Every time someone brings up Alaska, my stomach tightens. People usually imagine the stunning wilderness and glowing northern lights. But all I can think of is that night at Copper Creek Lodge. Back then, I had just finished my junior year of college and took a summer job as a front desk clerk and maintenance helper at a small lodge near Wrangell St. Elias National Park. It was June 2022, and for 3 months the lodge became my whole world. The property had 12 tiny cabins connected by gravel paths that always crunched underfoot no matter how soft you tried to step. The nearest neighbor was 40 miles away, and there was no cell service at all. The only connection to the outside was a landline phone in the office that often crackled so badly it was almost useless. At night, the silence was so deep it felt like no one else existed for miles. The guests that week were mostly hikers and photographers, people who came to Alaska to escape crowds and civilization. Among them was a couple, David and Amanda, staying in cabin 7 along with their friend Troy. David was the type who never stopped talking, always cracking jokes and keeping everyone laughing during meals. Amanda was quieter, more watchful, with this sharp way of noticing everything around her. Troy was more reserved, polite but often keeping to himself. Each day they would set out hiking and return exhausted, covered in dirt and mosquito bites. Their group seemed ordinary enough, just 3 friends exploring, though I noticed some tension between David and Troy that I couldn't quite explain. The day everything fell apart began like any other. I had spent most of it fixing a broken water heater in one of the cabins and restocking supplies in the lodge. The weather had turned unusually warm for June, and by evening, the mosquitoes were relentless. The strange twilight glow of an Alaskan summer lingered in the sky, never quite turning into full night. Around 9 p.m., I saw the 3 of them heading toward the bathhouse, a small wooden building about 100 yards from the lodge. Troy carried a towel and looked eager to clean up after their long hike. David and Amanda followed close behind, and I could hear David's voice getting louder as they walked, though I couldn't catch the words. Something about his tone struck me, but I brushed it off. Guests often snapped at each other after long days in the wilderness. About an hour later, I was in my small staff cabin reading when I heard voices outside. At first, I thought it was just guests returning from evening activities, but the voices grew sharper, panicked. Then I clearly heard Amanda calling out that Troy was missing. I set down my book and listened harder. Both Amanda and David were moving from cabin to cabin, knocking on doors and asking if anyone had seen him. Their voices had a frantic edge that made my chest tighten. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside, and Amanda spotted me right away. She ran up looking pale with David right behind her, his eyes wide in a way that unsettled me. Amanda insisted Troy had vanished after a fight near the bathhouse, but when I pressed for details, neither of them could keep the story straight. First, Amanda said Troy had argued with a stranger hanging around the bathhouse. Then David interrupted, claiming the stranger had been lurking there for hours. When I asked for a description, Amanda said the man was tall with dark hair, while David swore he was short with a beard. Their answers clashed so badly it was like they were talking about two different people. Amanda wrung her hands, scanning the dark woods nervously, while David paced back and forth, tugging his hair like he was rehearsing panic rather than showing real fear. I told them we should start by checking the bathhouse. Maybe Troy had just stormed off after the argument. As we walked, I noticed David shooting quick glances at Amanda, silent looks that made me uneasy. When we arrived, the building was empty, but outside told another story. The bench had been knocked over, and the dirt showed marks of a struggle, as if someone had been dragged or shoved. Amanda began to cry, saying we needed to call the police immediately. But when I suggested using the landline in the office, David pushed back, insisting we should search first and that Troy would surely return soon. His calm tone felt forced, like he was trying too hard to control the moment. I agreed to help search but decided silently that I would call for help afterward. For the next hour, we combed through the nearby trails, our flashlights cutting through the dark, shouting Troy's name with no answer. Every rustle of leaves sent chills up my spine. Amanda kept pleading about what to do, but David always steered the talk away from involving authorities. By midnight, we returned to the lodge, tired and shaken. I told them I was going to call the state troopers right away. That was when David's attitude shifted. He grabbed my arm firmly and insisted we wait until morning, saying Troy would likely come back on his own. Amanda disagreed, saying they had to call Troy's family, her voice cracking with desperation. They argued fiercely in front of me, David insisting that calling the police would only make things worse. Amanda begging for help. That's when I noticed scratches on David's arms that hadn't been there earlier. When I asked, he quickly claimed they came from bushes during the search, but they were deep and fresh, like claw marks from fingernails, the kind you get fighting someone off. I finally pressed hard enough to convince them, and we all walked to the office together. The lodge felt unnervingly quiet as I unlocked the door. Both of them stood close behind me, breathing hard. When I picked up the landline, there was no dial tone at all, just dead silence. I checked the wires, the plugs, everything, but the line was completely gone. David immediately said the weather had knocked the phone out, but the day had been clear with no storms. Amanda grew more frantic, pacing and muttering about finding help another way. I told them I would drive into the nearest town at dawn to report Troy missing, but David cut in quickly, saying he should go instead since he knew the area better. His eagerness only raised more red flags. I insisted we all stay together until things were sorted out. That's when I caught David and Amanda exchange another one of those silent, heavy looks that made my stomach sink. It was one of the callers from the missing caribou, and the time matched exactly with when all the signals had vanished. I never returned to that spot, and I never worked on another project in that area. Some things are better left alone. Every time someone mentions Alaska, I feel my stomach twist. People imagine beautiful landscapes and the northern lights, but all I remember is that night at Copper Creek Lodge. At that time, I had just finished my junior year of college and was working a summer job as a front desk clerk and maintenance helper at a small lodge near Wrangell St. Elias National Park. It was June 2022, and for 3 months, that lodge was my entire world. The place had 12 cabins linked by gravel paths that always crunched underfoot no matter how softly you walked. Our closest neighbor was 40 miles away, and cell service didn't exist. The only link to the outside was a single landline in the office that barely worked even on good days. At night, the silence was so heavy, it felt like the world had emptied out. The guests that week were mostly hikers and photographers, people who came to Alaska to leave everything behind. One group was a couple, David and Amanda, staying in cabin 7 with their friend Troy. David was the kind of guy who talked nonstop, always joking and filling the room with laughter. Amanda was quiet, always watching, like she never missed a detail. Troy was polite but more reserved, keeping to himself most of the time. They spent their days hiking the trails and came back each evening exhausted and covered in bites. They looked like normal friends on a trip, but I noticed a strange tension, especially between David and Troy. The day everything fell apart began like any other. I spent it fixing a broken water heater in cabin 3 and restocking the lodge. The weather was warmer than usual, and by evening the air was thick with mosquitoes. Twilight clung to the sky, never turning fully dark the way it does in Alaska during summer. Around 9 p.m., I saw the three of them heading toward the bathhouse, a small wooden building about 100 yards away. Troy carried a towel, looking eager to wash up. David and Amanda followed, and I could hear David's voice rising, though I couldn't make out the words. His tone made me pause, but I shook it off. Guests got into spats sometimes in the wilderness. About an hour later, I was in my cabin reading when I heard voices outside. At first, I thought it was just other guests, but the tone was sharper, panicked. Then I heard Amanda shouting that Troy was missing. I set down my book and listened closer. Amanda and David were going from cabin to cabin, knocking and asking about him. Their voices carried an edge that unsettled me. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside. Amanda rushed toward me, her face pale, with David right behind her, his eyes wild. Amanda said Troy had disappeared after a fight near the bathhouse. But when I asked questions, their stories didn't add up. First, Amanda claimed Troy argued with a stranger near the bathhouse. Then David jumped in, saying the stranger had been hanging around for hours. When I asked for a description, Amanda said tall with dark hair. David said short with a beard. Their answers were so different, it was like they imagined separate people. Amanda kept wringing her hands and glancing around, while David paced back and forth, tugging his hair. It felt staged, like they were acting panicked instead of truly afraid. I suggested we check the bathhouse in case Troy had just stormed off. As we walked, I noticed David giving Amanda quick, uneasy glances that made me uncomfortable. The bathhouse itself was empty, but outside told a different story. A bench was knocked over, and the dirt showed scuff marks like someone had fallen or been dragged. Amanda broke down, saying we had to call the police. I suggested using the landline, but David argued against it, insisting we search first and that Troy would come back soon. His calmness seemed forced, like he was trying to stay in control. I agreed to search but decided to call later, no matter what. For the next hour, we walked the trails, shining flashlights into the trees and shouting for Troy, but nothing answered. The woods felt alive with threats, and every sound made us tense. Amanda kept asking what we should do, while David steered the talk away from calling anyone. By midnight, we returned to the lodge exhausted and uneasy. I said I was going to call the state troopers right then. That's when David changed. He grabbed my arm, telling me to wait until morning, that Troy would come back on his own. Amanda argued, saying they needed to call Troy's family, her voice cracking with worry. They argued hard in front of me, David insisting police would make it worse, Amanda pleading for help. That's when I noticed scratches on David's arms that hadn't been there before. He said he got them from bushes during the search, but they were fresh and deep, like fingernail marks from someone fighting back. I pushed harder, and finally they gave in, so we walked to the office together. The building was silent as I opened the door, both of them breathing heavily behind me. I picked up the landline, but there was no sound at all. The phone was completely dead. I checked everything, but it was useless. David quickly blamed the weather, though it had been clear all day. Amanda grew more agitated, pacing and muttering about finding help another way. I said I'd drive to the nearest town in the morning to report Troy missing, but David cut me off, saying he should go since he knew the area better. His eagerness felt suspicious. I told him we all needed to stay together until we knew more, and that was when I saw David and Amanda trade one of those strange, heavy glances that made my stomach sink.